So we're going to have a conversation about social movements, about women's rights and inclusion in planning for city development or county development. It's an interesting conversation. We always have conversations with Olando about, especially the inclusion of the minorities in development conversations. Today, ahead of tomorrow's International Women's Day, we want to talk about focus it on women. But to welcome you to the show, City has a day's proverb.
I do. Our proverbs for the whole of this week come from the country of Rwanda. You cannot outdistance that which is running after you, but not what is running inside you. Whatever is running besides you, you can, or after you, you can outrun it. But if it's inside you, you cannot outrun it.
You can't. Kabisa. Betty, good morning.
Good morning to you.
That proverb, what do you understand by it? What are the Rwandese saying?
According to what I think, is that whatever you're doing, if it comes right from you, you have the strength. But you can move away from what you're not working with. So as a human rights defender, I am who I am. I fight for human rights, and I believe it cannot run away from me.
Why do you call yourself human rights defender? Others call themselves activists and campaigners and advocates.
You see, these are just names that were put there. But the truth is that we are human rights defenders. Because according to the Constitution, it tells us very well that we should protect the human life. And this is the most important thing. So we are just human rights defenders. We become activists when we make a lot of noise. That's only what makes us become activists.
It's a volume that changes the name.
Yeah, it's just the volume.
Is there anybody who's not a human rights defender then?
Of course, there are people who are not human rights defenders. Those people who violate the rights of human beings.
The violators.
Yeah.
Kabisa. Olando, welcome as well. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
As always. So we want to talk about inclusion, and I just want to come back to you, Betty. When you talk about social movements, and how do you organize yourself, for example, when you in the issue of human rights, defending human rights? What are social movements?
Social movements are movements made by the people themselves. It's the voice of the people themselves. According to our Constitution, again, Article 1 tells us that the sovereignty of this country belongs to the people of Kenya. So as human rights defenders, we come together in our communities. Remember, this is now not a formal thing that has been made there, but it is the community itself that is coming up together because of their social problems to fight against them. And this is how we mobilize ourselves.
Okay. So when we talk about defending something, the assumption is that thing is there. It exists. Because, you're not going to be able to protect something which doesn't exist. And in order to then defend it even more, then we need to see that it's somehow living out. Do we see the rights of women and their inclusion being lived out in Kenya, in other parts of the world today? Before we can then say, okay, actually, you know what? Now we need to put a fence around it and make sure that is secure. Or are we saying, we've tried a little bit, that which we've achieved, let's defend that? Or are we saying we're seeing it lived out properly, blood pumping, heart beating, these rights are being lived out. Now let's defend them. What's the situation?
Okay, let me say something, because I started human rights defending when I was very young. And I've seen a lot of changes. Of course, a lot of things have happened and they've really changed. Remember, there was a time when women did not even have rights to speak. They never went to school to give space to the men to go to school. The boy child could go to school and the girl could get married so that they could get them the school fees to pay for that boy child. Nowadays, we have pretty ladies like you, even in the studios today.
Mashallah. And
we're happy about it. We have women in our political arena, although it is still difficult because of our struggling cultures. As Africans, we have very strong cultures. And these cultures put us down because whenever you talk about a woman, of course, our culture tells us men are more superior. Our religion tells us men are more superior. So we still have some struggle, of course. And why do we defend the rights of women? Remember, we started women's rights started being advocated for a long time ago. And they tried to do women in development until the 1995, you remember the Beijing talk and what have you. And of course, after Beijing, we have seen a lot of changes. But still, do we really have that power to see the women standing out for themselves and saying that this is like, for example, if a woman stood today with for the presidency of Kenya, would she get that position? So these are the things that we need to really defend and fight for as women, to ensure that women are also given an opportunity to show what they can really do. But the barriers that are there are because of our cultures and our wrong beliefs. And again, the lack of unity amongst the women themselves. And this is why we have to put a lot of social movements and a lot of advocacy against this, so that women can realize that we need to now support our own. Remember, women were created as helpers of men. And this is, I think, what we believe in. Today, if you stood up with your male counterpart. As a woman, I would go for that male counterpart. I'll say, at the end of the day, when a woman gets power, they become very rude.
You as a woman would say that
that is
right
what
now.
Women say, because this is the reality. But we need now to help women move out of this. Hence, we still need to advocate and defend the rights of women, because when a woman stands up and says, I can do this, and then another woman demeans her, and then a man on the other side is demeaning the same woman, then we are in
double
problems.
trouble.
You know, what I find interesting is that we're talking about a situation where women take the forefront in not just finding fault, but demeaning their own kind. So it's like the very thing they speak of when they say, when women get power, they're arrogant. They forget it's human beings who, as a whole, both men and women, who get a little drunk when they get power and do crazy things. So it's like saying we're used to men being drunk with power, but we are not going to accommodate women being drunk with power. And yet, traditionally, if I look at it, women were never really that powerless, in my view. The power was softer. I'm saying softer because if you look at the influence of generations in an African society, who would you say influences the generations more, the men or the women?
The women.
Precisely. So, in communities where you have a matrilineal system, you will find men with very interesting traits that, for instance, attention to detail, people who focus on structures and organizations. And usually you'll find, when I say matrilineal, it's because those are traits that are common among women, not among men. Men have this nice, broad, universal view of things. Broad, big plans and massive ideas. So what I'm saying is, how do you then balance between what was traditionally African and bring it into the 21st century, so that with all the changes and the influence we have from the West, that when we talk about women's rights, it is actually women's rights according to what we, the Africans, believe it should be, and not predominantly the influence of the West.
That's true. Olando, when you talk about women inclusion in matters of development, I mean, Betty has mentioned in terms of electing women into positions of leadership, even appointing women into positions of leadership, communities assigning leadership roles for women. Now let's come into what we see in our devolved units. CIDPs have just been rewritten and redone. From your own engagement with the CIDP process and the counties, do you feel that the voice of women was included more this time than it was previously?
Thank you, Eric. I think as I answer your question, I need to properly introduce Mama Kenya. We call her Mama Kenya.
Mama Kenya.
Because she comes from Kangemi. And in Kangemi, she does an amazing work on community organizing and building social movements around residents' associations. And I remember when we visited, now to get to your question, when we first came here with my colleague Jamin, and we were speaking about the People's Manifesto.
Yes.
Dr. Mugatiti, there's a lot of skepticism. He didn't believe on residents' association organizing. into a people's manifesto, and how this translates into a community strategic plan, and the extent to which this will inform a policy document on community integrated development plan, being a policy document.
Uh-huh.
And the discussion was that, it's a political space. That what is the space of residents association and voices of women like Mama Kenya and Mama Betty in this space? And to what extent can we entrench affirmative actions to ensure that vulnerable populations who are vulnerable socioeconomically, and sometimes who may suffer more as women? We did have an opportunity to then have community strategic plans that drew from the People's Manifesto, get into community strategic plans. And Kangemi was one of the settlements headed by Mama Betty, Mama Kenya. And I come with her as a demonstration that if communities organize, then 50% of their issues can find their space into the county integrated development plans, which is now a policy document. So then we shall shift the conversation later on to what or how is this implemented as a policy document, and what is the role of women organized groups and social movements like Mama Betty's.
So take us, the two of you, choose whoever is going to tell us this story of how the people of Kangemi organized as a neighborhood association, as neighbors, to decide what is important to them and calling it their own manifesto, and how then whether it's in the current Nairobi CIDP. Start from the beginning, Mama Betty.
Okay, in Westlands, Westlands is one of the richest sub-counties in Nairobi. So people do not know that in Westlands we also have informal settlements. And about 60% of the residents of Westlands actually live in those informal settlements. But because of the mighty power and the conflict of the haves and have-nots, people might not know the history behind the
people
Westlands.
Don't see the majority.
And even when you talk about Westlands, nobody cares about Westlands because they think Westlands is a very posh area. But we have those very posh residents associations, which of course had their own residents associations associated to Kara. Like the Runda, the Loresho, and the rest. But you see, we never had residents associations for the informal settlement people at all. Because nobody, for example, we started one in 2011. This is called Westlands Informal Settlement Residents Association, which has given birth to a number of residents associations, which includes the Kangemi Neighborhood Association, it includes the Kakibagare Neighborhood Association, and these are the groups that we formed, and most of them are women-led. Most of them are women-led in the informal settlements. And this is how now we came up together. And in partnership with other non-governmental organizations, we are able to now talk to the women, have some little forums. You see, public participation is a right. But do we experience it from the government? No. Because when the government wants to do public participation, it's only done when they have their need. So we as the community felt that we need to have our own public participation and also make our women understand what are we talking about when we talk about the CIDP. Because you see, this looks like another animal outside there to a woman who wakes up at 3 in the morning and goes back to bed at 10 at night. She doesn't even have time to listen to the radio. So she'll never get public awareness of what we're talking about in CIDP, what is a budget, how do we form these things. So we started mobilizing ourselves as the community, talking to the women, of course with a little assistance from the non-governmental organizations that are around, maybe get like 20, 30 women, put them together, discuss, give them awareness, tell them what they need to engage in, what you need to ask for. This led to me being elected as the person to represent the CBEF in the Nairobi County. This was during the tenure of our Honorable Evans Kidero. And when I went there, I was able now to understand even more about the budget, because you remember we had a very bulky budget in the Nairobi County. Let me tell you, even for a professor, it would not be easy to understand how that budget came. But it is through our movements that we changed that budget to now the budget that we have, which is program based. So these movements have been going on slowly by slowly. As the community, we mobilize ourselves, we discuss, we make our manifesto, we sit down, do a strategic plan. Like now we've done even the inclusion of the refugees, because we have a lot of refugees who are living amongst us, and we have the Refugee Act also. So we've tried to make this through the women groups, the self-help groups. We create awareness in the very, very small groups we have. We even go to the markets and talk to the people in the market. You see, this person is selling, and you are there talking about you people should get concerned. We need markets. You don't have a market. You see, like in Kangemi, you don't have a market. All of you see the market as you go up country, isn't it? Yeah. On the roadside. So in order to get this market, how are we going to get this market? And the market is where women are. The majority of people who are in the markets, of course, are women. But when it comes to leadership of the market, of course, you'll find them electing men. Because they say, you see, men are stronger than us. They can budge and they'll talk louder than us. So we are now trying to tell them that, no, we need to change and let women also speak. But we have the market associations now. We have the small Juakali associations. Everybody is now getting into this manifesto to ensure that we are now fighting for our rights according to the constitution. Because before, what would we talk about development? People would think development is about roads. It's so shameful that even after we promulgated the constitution in 2010, even up to now, there are some Kenyans who don't even know which is the function of the national government and which is the function of the county government. Yep. So these are the things that the social movements and especially the inclusion of women is doing at the grassroots level to make sure that Mama Mboga who wakes up at 3 understands that, I have to go to that public participation forum. Although, again, we have a challenge. When they call for the public participation forum from the county, where do they take them? Like in Westlands, they take them to City Park. City Park is very far away from Kangemi. Yeah. And remember, we spoke about devolved government and said that the government should go to ward level. But we do not have public participation for us in the ward level. So we have to follow the public participation where it is. And if we have not formed these movements, and if we are not with these, we have not done these strong movements, who will go to those public participations? Of course, the people who will want their things to pass there. So we've seen a lot of things passing through in our CIDP. For example, the safe house for gender survivors that will be coming up, a very big one at Mjiwa Huruma. That is something that we advocated for, and land was given by the county. The GAP was financing, but I believe this year, the national government affirmative action through Madam Esther Passaris signed an agreement with the former county government that she's going to fund it at 50 million. So we'll have the first biggest safe space for gender-based survivors in Westlands that was advocated through these social movements.
How large, in terms of numbers, is this organization?
It's large. It's large because the WINSREA has about a membership of 300 and something people as WINSREA itself. We have small community-based organizations that are also partners. So it's like a networking forum. So we could reach about 100, about 100,000 there. Okay,
now my next question. Once people have been emancipated or they've started the journey of emancipation, there's this little detail of how you survive day to day. The small-scale businessmen, what we call SMEs, etc., etc. How do you work with these organizations? How do you ensure that your members and people who live in these communities are able to not just ensure that their businesses thrive, but that the businesses also grow? How do you advocate for this particular? Because if you're talking about 100,000 members, it means the population there is infinitely more than 100,000.
Yeah, it is.
So if you have a business, you already have a ready clientele within the community. Yes. So there.
You see, everybody is doing their own small businesses. Even as community-based organizations, they came together. Some of them have community projects. Some of them are doing their own businesses and maybe getting some small loans. So we are working in partnership with other organizations, of course, with some other banks. They give the women some loans, and this helps them to empower themselves. We also have our MP Westlands, the wife, Madam Electina, started the Joy War groups. These are table banking groups, and most of our groups are there. They do table banking. They get small loans. They are able to grow their businesses. They do massive trainings to these women and teach them on how to change and innovate their businesses. So we what we are doing in this part of development is to make sure that we have a lot of partners who are empowering our women and trying to help the women also understand that it is important to be secure financially, because if you're not secure financially, then automatically, even when we say we would want to have power, how will you have power if you're not financially secure?
You see, there's a dependency, I'm going to use the word syndrome, that the politicians in this country like to favor and like to advocate. And that is through the culture of the handout. Now, when people are secure and they're able to depend on their own, as we say, kujitegemea, it then removes that power from the politician.
Yes.
So my question, how supportive are the political class? Or you smile. And how destructive are the political class to these movements? Because when these movements are strong, the politicians' power is definitely infinitely reduced, unless they are smart enough to be part and parcel of this movement. Yes.
I think I would say that, of course, it's not very easy to work with politicians, and especially for us as human rights defenders, because most of the time, we are their watchdogs. But in Westlands, we are quite lucky. For one reason, our MP, the Honorable Tim Wanyonyi, is even the person who's advocating against this dependency syndrome. He's talking to the youth every day in his meetings. He's talking to the women, telling them that you people need to change. You don't need to wait for me to come and give you 100 shillings, but you need to have an idea of how to get that 100 shillings. So on the part of politicians, I know how tricky it is. I have worked with politicians. I started human rights defending since the 70s, and I know how tough it is to work with them. I know it's tricky on the part of the MCAs, because when it comes to the part of the MCAs, they hold a small part, but sometimes it's very difficult to get really a good grip of them to understand the rights of women and other things. And when it comes to the nominated ones, you see that again, they don't have enough power, because you'll see most of the time women who are nominated, who are in those seats, most of them are nominated. Most of them are nominated. But for Westlands, one part that has really made us feel empowered is because we have an MP who listens. This is an MP, when we have even any challenge, you can call upon and tell him, now we as women are calling you to this meeting here to understand our problems, and these are our problems. And he will walk the walk with us. He will also visit those residents' associations. He will talk to people, and what he tries to tell people is that you people need to be empowered. But I know how tough it is, because we have other counties that constituencies that are near Westlands, and you see what is really happening.
Within the same county.
Within the same county, and we know what is really happening. Because the politicians really will like us getting suppressed, so that you'll be begging, and when you're begging, you do not have a voice. So you'll always be begging. But with us in Westlands, I think we are quite safe.
City, I want to add something to that. There are two things that from my perspective you ask. That the space of public participation is a space for political power. And that in most occasions, when you don't have the material power, you get disadvantaged. But then, the organized social movement as a form of social capital in communities gives communities that opportunity to build the material power, to engage within the space of political power and challenge some of these norms. And I've been telling the social movements that we hope that in 2027, the Kangemi market, informal market chairperson will perhaps be the member of parliament, or should be the member of county assembly, or should be the governor. Why not? Because she says that they are the majority in Westlands. But how come they are not represented within the political space? I know that may not be a popular opinion for a politician who makes policies, but that is what social movement should do to shift the balance. But then, what is the theory that we should believe in? That if people engage by donating their power to the legislative arm of government, to the executive, and to the judiciary, in the event where they donate their power, do not help them, what do? Can they take this power back?
They actually can.
And how do they take it? Can they take it through changing the power imbalance by virtue of organizing at that resident association level? Because when you look at the aspirations of the County Government Act, we talk about village councils and say the village councils is the place where we need to debate that if Eric Latif did a mistake in this village, then we can call him to the village arena and have a conversation with him. And if there was a conflict, then we will be applying alternative justice system. That's a power that we've donated to the judiciary. That if there was about budget making, it will be our executive to make the budget. That if it's about legislative agenda, then that's the space that will be making contributions, particularly on county integrated development plan. But why is this not happening? It's because communities need to take their political power back. And then when they take their political power back, then use this to organize their material power and have a voice. And from my perspective, we've tried this theory, and it's worked 50%. So then, at Pamoja Trust, we believe that it's something that we can entrench more in communities, and it can work more. And the people who are to drive it are the community members themselves. Those who feel the pinch.
Let's take a break on that note. 25 minutes to 10. Mama Betty Hamud is a human rights defender. Olando Samuel is the executive director of Pamoja Trust. We are talking about social movements, women rights, and inclusion in county planning processes.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Olando Samuel from Pamoja Trust and Betty Hamud, a human rights defender, talking about the power of social movements, the power of citizens to engage, come together and plan their own development and influencing government planning on that. Betty, you told us about what the community has done in terms of coming and identifying a need, which is we need a safe house for victims of domestic violence and gender-based violence. This has found itself into the county integrated development plan.
Yes.
Now, the next thing, of course, is to find itself in the budget. What is the role of the community in making sure that it goes all the way to that level?
You see, this is where now the role of the community really comes in, because we have to advocate. As much as we are waiting for well-wishers and other people to sponsor our projects, we have to have every project that we want in the budget, whether there is finance or not. So how do we do this? By advocating for it as the community, ensuring that we put it through all the processes of the budget, because you see, this is a cycle. The budget is a cycle, and you have to get engaged in every point to ensure that you're following it up and don't stop until it is printed in black and white. That's when you'll know that it is there. And then from there, now you start doing monitoring, evaluation, and following up. Because as much as you've given it a budget, you'll find those tricky things that come in, that we spent this money on another project somewhere else. So it is upon us as the community, whenever we come together and advocate for something, ensure that we follow it through the cycle of the budget, make sure it is in the CIDP, it is in the ADP on annual basis, ensure that we are following up, do a lot of engagements with our political leaders, of course, visit even those offices, talk to them about those projects. Because if we don't fight for what we need, remember, it is not a priority to the politicians. The politicians want what they see, what will give them fame. But for us, the people, we want what our needs want.
Then you need very many partners in such a journey, because as a community you have advocated, you're bringing these things up, but you need various people who have the power to actually insert it into the budget, insert the budget, get the budget approved. You need your MCA, you need the chief officer for the specific department, you need the CEC, you need the governor, you need the other functions. How do you get all those on board?
Now, these the processes, and this is why we need to continue having awareness forums for the community to understand, because there's where the community comes directly with the budget, and there's where the technical team comes directly with the budget. So if you're not sure of what time this is happening, then you might get lost. So you need to know how do we engage. It's by forming, you see the movements we have formed. This is a movement that we can just write a letter and ask for an appointment even with the CEC finance and tell him on this part we would want to see you urgently because of ABCD, and he will give us audience because we are already in a movement, unlike when you come out as an individual and ask for something. So the engagement is really tough. And as I've told you, I have personally engaged with the CIDP. I've engaged with the ADP. I've engaged with the CECs. I've engaged with the governors themselves when we are talking about these things. So it is quite a process. And to make somebody understand, you have to have a lot of power. And where do we get the power? Like now when we are talking about the social movement, so it's not only in Westlands. I'm only talking specifically about Westlands because I come from Westlands. But you see, we have also other social movements in other areas. We also have the women and land right movement that we call Haki kwa Ardhi kwa Kina Mama, Akima, that we come together and discuss our various issues. And the good thing about these social movements of ours are not only in Nairobi County alone. We have them countrywide. So if we meet, it's only that we do not have the resources. I wish we had the resources and we could meet. I'm telling you, nationally, we don't have any field in Kenya that can fit the social movements in Kenya.
Do you think that these movements or the movement should be involved at inception and planning stage of some of these things that we're talking about here, as opposed to saying, well, okay, here's what we want to do eventually, then how do you fit in? But whether it's county governments, whether it's those then that can even, go all the way to national government, do you think that at the inception stage, where everybody's, putting together policy at the start of a new administration or in transition, should there be inclusion?
Yeah, that's the most important place. That's the most important place. If you lose that part, who will now put it in from another step? You have to start it from down there. So inclusion of the community, and especially the people who need the services, should start from there. This is where you air out and say, this is our need, and this is what we want, so that you can debate on that and make sure that it is inside or it is being debated. Remember when we were talking about gender-based violence, because this is something that I'm very passionate about. I do coordinate the Westlands GBV working group. These are also community groups. When we were talking about issues of safe spaces for GBV survivors, nobody thought they were important. You would even tell the police, they would tell you what for. Women will take advantage of that facility. When you go to the county government, they'll tell you, no, we don't need. At the end of the day, the police are there, they'll take the cases to court, and that's the end of the day. Then we were asking them, and then after the police has taken the case to court, then what happens to the survivor? What do we do about the survivor? So this is how we started the advocacy at a very low level, and ensure that everybody is now singing that song. In fact, we are even relaxing in Westlands. We are relaxing and waiting for them to do the things for us now. Because the hardcore part had already been done by the movements of women.
City.
Yes. If you look at these movements that we are speaking of, have you considered the full potential? I'm going to explain why I'm asking the question. You see, when people form themselves into groups and they get to the point where they have determined and they've found ways of actually surviving. And the interesting about survival, the next phase will be surviving even without the government, meaning you've figured out. For instance, I know where food comes from. I know people who farm. Okay? We are in this group of 100 people here, 100 people there. We know what we eat. Can we have a direct contact with the people who produce that food so that they can send it to us directly? Right. We have a school, it's not being very well run by the county government. Can we ask the county government, because now if we look at ourselves, we are 10 groups of 100 people. Can we ask the county government to allow us to run these schools? So that the only duty we give you is to pay the salaries, but everything else we take care of. We determine how our children go to school, what it is that happens to them. You see, the process of self-determination, that's where it gets to. Now, the county system was, in my mind, purposed to remove the dependency from the national government and to localize. You see, what your groups and what Pamoja Trust, what you people are doing is what the county government ought to have been promoting. Because when you do that, the economy actually grows. Because the majority of the people happen to be in that category of people whom we know as just living literally from hand to mouth. Literally.
Yes.
Now, if you give them the muscle to move slightly beyond that hand to mouth, they now start creating value. Now, because there are many, the multiplier effect that comes into being because of the numbers is something that is profound. Now, I'm saying that this is something that can actually happen. Now, in your case, it's already happening. It's just that it hasn't gone those many steps. Because the starting point is getting people to believe in it, and they do that by believing in themselves and understanding, actually, you know something, we don't really need someone else to do this thing for us. We can actually do it ourselves. Now, once you've gotten there, then everything now becomes possible. These rights that you have, these rights that you believe you have, and the rights that are due to you, you have the muscle to actually claim it. Again, going back to my favorite topic, it's in direct conflict with our political process. Because either the politician will try to take over that group so that they run it, or they will oppose it with every ounce of energy they have. How do you get the politician to believe in this process so that they become part and parcel of the movement?
You see, as I've told you, I was a human rights defender since before, and we advocated even by throwing stones. Those days,
we threw stones. Been proved through scientific research that they're a very good way of communicating.
They're a very good way of communication. We've done all of this, but you see, with time, we've changed our method of working because we realized that this political class will never allow the people say what they want. They want to control everything. They want to control power in every way. So we changed our move, and hence now started forming these polite movements. We are not fighting, we are not quarreling, but we are arguing with facts. You're getting me? We are arguing with fact. And when we argue with fact, we get a lot of support. The same as the politicians. So the politicians say, with me, if I want to get support, I have to give handouts to the people. But these people are just talking to people and they're following them at the back. We need to see what they are saying. So they at least this type of advocacy we are using is now bringing some little harmony between us and the politicians. A little. I'm not saying that I know governance is poor, and we need a lot to advocate about governance. I'm not against that. And I know that it is not very easy to make human rights a priority to politicians. Because with me, I call it a man-eat-man society. When you're a politician, your work is to think of how you're going to eat the society so that you can prevail in what you want to do. But the tactics that we are using are the most important weapons that we need to start from. Remember, if we were as easy as that, we could not have survived, especially me in a place like Westlands. With that conflict of the haves and have-nots, with the mighty powerful people there, we could have been finished long time ago. But because we are using the strategy of making them understand that whatever we are doing is not for our own good, but for the good of this country and for the generations that are coming, then we are surviving even up to now.
You know, I bring this topic. You've heard politicians at the highest levels of our political structure talk about the power of the MCA. Now, that's the politician machinani. MP slightly removed. Governor, senator, removed. But MCA, again, it's not that I have a solution, but I keep asking, how do you get an MCA to buy into this? And I think what Olando said now comes into being. If you elect one of your
If the
own
MCA came from
amongst you, though they also tend to change once they get in those positions, but at least if they came from amongst you, arguably there would be a higher chance of having a change agent being in that position of MCA. So, do you have plans to ensure that, okay, I don't know about the previous election, maybe you've already done that, but in the coming elections, you focus the energy on ensuring that people who are elected as MCAs are people who have received salvation into this gospel that this movement has, so that you then know that when we get to the county assembly, we have people who are committed to this way of looking at things.
Yes, of course. We really advocate for this. Not only for MCAs who are men, but even women, that even our women should come out and ask for these elective positions. Unfortunately, there is something in the political air that it's not very easy to change. Do you know why? The Honorable James Orengo was once a university student in Nairobi.
Yes, he was.
And he was once arrested because of the issue of land.
Yes.
And we were the people who fought very hard to make him released because we were asking him, ameshikiwa nini? He's asking for the land rights. But remember, there's a time he became the CS of lands. And at the end of the day, everybody knows that he did not give us what we expected as human rights defenders with all the knowledge he had, isn't it?
Right.
Because once you go into governance, they have their own way of planning their own things to ensure that everything will live in their power. And this we have seen. We've elected even people from the boda sector, from the matatu fraternity, those young people from our own communities. But when they go there, I'm telling you, within no time, they have changed. And you won't even believe, yes, of course, sometimes maybe on 1, 2, 3.
Did you elect those that were, deeply involved in your daily work, or did you elect people who, because he's a matatu person?
No, we have a number of them that we know who are with us together. Remember, even the president of the poor, who was the MCA in a ward in Kibra. His name was Kotieno.
He's no longer.
He was an advocate. You see, even to get that title of the president of the poor, you can understand where he came from. But when he went into the elective position, in fact, he was the one who even didn't survive for the second round. Because once you enter that place, it is our time to eat. I think that is the problem and the dilemma of the type of politics we have in Africa.
Have you considered vying yourself?
Myself? I've never considered, but I do empower a lot of people who have vied and they've gone through. And for one reason, because with me, I believe I'm a human rights defender. And I do not want to be taken into this until the politics of this country can change, which I'm not seeing it change because I'm now growing into old age.
Get in there and change it. Go in there and change it.
How many have gone there saying that they're going to change it and they've never been able?
You could be the one that changes it.
Okay. Maybe I'll consider in 2027.
Because probably what they need is a power of example. This person who has been fighting for human rights for all these years, for decades, who has engaged the community, and they've seen the success of what you've brought to them in the community, and then now you go in the leadership. So when you're nurturing other leaders, they'll be coming and they'll be seeing, okay, I need to be like Mama Betty. I mean, this is why the people elected.
No, Eric, there's something that happens. When you go with that philosophy, they attach you to a senior politician for mentoring. And for mentorship. It happens in the last elections. It's also happened, I think, in 2017, where we had a young politician, I think, from the central part of Kenya. The first thing they buy you a 4x4 car when you are campaigning in a donkey. Then they tell you now we'll attach you to Eric to mentor you. Then we also, I think, had one from Rift Valley. Then they tell you, no, You've made it to parliament, but we don't think you can think for yourself.
Need mentorship.
We need to mentor you, and the mentoring, we know what it portends. But there's a power that social movements have that they must exploit, and this power is in the alternatives, issues of access to credit, issues of dispute resolution, issues of representation. You don't need to go to the mainstream.
You can still do it.
You can still create your
From
parallel
the
system.
community.
Then they'll come to negotiate with you.
Very well done. Very well said. Olando Samuel is the executive director of Pamoja Trust. Betty Hamud is a human rights defender. We've been talking about the power of social movements in inclusion on county planning processes. Thank you for tuning in